Hello everybody. So, I don't even know what time it is because I have to film you on my phone because camera battery died. But anyway, it is Tuesday, August 24th, and I'm not starting this exactly tonight, but I thought I'd go over the synopsis of this before I get started with it, and that is Book 5 in the Dark Tower series, Wolves of the Calla by Stephen King. So, if you guys have not watched my Dark Tower series, I would definitely check out the videos in the description below. There's a playlist specifically for the Dark Tower, but then also I have a Stephen King reading series playlist you guys can check out because if you're not aware, for the last now going on a year and 3/4, something like that, I've been going through Stephen King's books chronologically by publication date, but series all the way through. So I get started with the series and I read the entirety of it because I'm looking specifically at how the series develops over time and as the story progresses by itself, because I want to see if King's writing gets better from book to book in the series and if things remain consistent, because it just doesn't make sense for me to try and read a series and read other books in between. It just feels like it's going to be really confusing. So I thought, especially with the Dark Tower series, his most expansive one he's ever written, it makes more sense to read the entirety of it before going on to another chronologically published book. But we're nearing the end of this. We're over halfway done with the Dark Tower, now going into book 5. So I'm really excited because I really liked how The Wind Through the Keyhole, which was book 4.5 and was a prequel book basically written years after the original series was done. I really like how it bridged a gap between Wizard and Glass, which was book 4, and this one. So let me read the synopsis for you guys of Wolves of the Calla. Roland Deschain and his quartet are bearing southeast through the forests of Midworld. Their path takes them to the outskirts of Calla Bryn Sturgis, a tranquil valley community of farmers and ranchers on Midworld's borderlands. Beyond the town, the rocky ground rises toward the hulking darkness of Thunderclap, the source of a terrible affliction that is slowly stealing the community's soul. The Wolves of Thunderclap and their unspeakable depredation are coming. That was a hard word to say. To resist them is to risk all, but these are odds the gunslingers are used to, and they can give the Calla Falcon both courage and cunning. Their guns, however, will not be enough. Thunderclap is interesting because this was brought up slightly in Wizard and Glass, where at the end of Wizard and Glass, we learned that that was where they were headed, the team of Roland, Jake, Eddie, Susannah, and Oi, the Billy Bumbler, and we didn't know necessarily what we were looking for with it, but we knew that by going to Thunderclap, they were going to get some information about where to head in terms of the Dark Tower. Like, it was basically going to be on their way toward the Dark Tower, following the beam. Then there's the Wolves of Thunderclap, which I'm assuming is what this Wolves of the Calla idea are. And I don't know if you can exactly tell with my camera on my phone, but this person here has kind of like a face of a wolf, almost. And I think that they're gonna be some kind of other army. Assuming that this one specifically too, again, I don't know if you can see, he's holding what looks like a blue orb. So I'm gonna assume that based on that, we're also gonna see another one of the wizard orbs be brought in that was brought into the story in Wizard and Glass. So I'm curious now to see how all of that happens, and if the guns aren't going to be enough to stop them, what the hell are these guys going to get into? This feels like it's going to be a heart-wrenching one. I don't want people to die, but it's going to probably happen. It sucks. Without the afterword that is involved in pretty much every book that there is, and the author's note that's also involved in these books, Wolves of the Calla is about 709 pages, give or take about 5 pages, basically, with the author's note and the afterword from the author, basically. So we're going to say probably somewhere between 715 pages for this book. But, so for those of you that are not familiar with how I do these reading vlog review videos, I come in about every 100 pages and talk about what the book does in terms of like the story, what happens, and kind of my general thoughts in terms of any issues I come up with, anything that seems out of place and other thoughts that kind of come up as I read these aspects. Like, I have had many times, especially with the Dark Tower series, talk about, you know, things that I'm linking to with other books I've so far read with Stephen King, more specifically with like The Stand or other books that are, I already know, kind of involved in the Dark Tower world. Because if you don't know anything about the Dark Tower, like I said, I would definitely go check out the playlist below, but the Dark Tower is an expansive world that Stephen King has created where it's kind of a multiverse kind of idea, because the Dark Tower is the epicenter of all these parallel universes and worlds, and this spreads into so many of Stephen King's standalones and other series, and it's something that it's very hard to really describe, because it's kind of like you have to start getting into his work to start seeing the threads. I could kind of tell you where certain characters come up, but to explain the overall world, it's kind of like you have to go in blind, because it's just so difficult to describe exactly how everything works and like how people are connected without spoiling a lot of other stuff too, because there's just so much that's involved in telling about the world of Midworld and the Tower that could end up spoiling other stories involved in Stephen King's writing. And it's just very hard to do so without feeling like you're not doing justice or you're spoiling everything. So I would highly recommend at least checking out the other videos of this series to learn more about what exactly goes on, because for one, this is the 5th book in this series, but two, over the course of those other videos, I do talk about things that are tied into this series and this world and everything, as I will continue to do in this video.
Hi guys, so it is now just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Wednesday, August 25th, and I've reached page 100 of Wolves of Calla. In all honesty, not a lot has happened. It's just there's been a lot of, like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, there's not a lot that's happened, but a lot has happened. So I guess let's just get into it. So we start off this book in a prologue where we actually go and see some people that are a part of this town that's called Calla, Sturgis, which is the area that Roland and the team are going to be heading into. And essentially what we learn is that this town is ravaged every so often, every like 20 some years or so, by these things called the wolves. And essentially they take children, and they're usually just having reached puberty or a little bit older, like they're not full adults yet, they're somewhere between puberty and adulthood, and they basically take them and do something with them that then leaves them as kind of like shells almost when they come back. And the townspeople are, you know, seeing that this is going to be happening again, and they're terrified. They don't know what to do, and they feel like they either have to run away, they have to fight, like no one knows exactly what to do. But one of the men that comes in here that's mentioned to be somebody that had come from Jerusalem's Lot so many years ago, which I believe is who we consider to be Father Callahan from the book Salem's Lot. If you watch my Wizard and Glass video, at the end of that I talked a little bit about some characters that are involved in the Dark Tower. They talk about how like the kids get sent to this place called Thunderclap, which is another town. Father Callahan talks about though how somebody has seen basically Roland and his gang coming toward this area, and so they're hoping that maybe these gunslingers can help them with this problem, which my guess is basically the biggest chunk of this book is Roland and the gang basically helping out this poor town, because these monsters of some kind are here ruining everything. So then we get to part 1, which is called Todash, and we start off in chapter 1 where the gang has basically been traveling for a while since the events of Wizard and Glass, and they end up going down the path of the beam, and eventually they stop at a place to rest. There's a lot of talk, though, about the number 19. That seems to be a very important number, some kind of magical number involved in this story. And after they end up stopping to rest for the night, Eddie and Jake actually end up in chapter 2, New York Groove, going through essentially what Roland later calls a toe dash, which basically a toe dash is when somebody is able to get so kind of meditative in a state that they transcend their dreams into being kind of almost lucid-like, I guess, because essentially Eddie and Jake end up going back to 1977, the day actually that Jake goes through New York after he realizes he's not going to die that day, which gets explained in the Wastelands more specifically. Essentially the day that he ends up going to find the rose in the vacant lot, and he gets the book about Charlie the Choo Choo and the riddle book, there is this thing that Eddie and Jake are meant to see. There's something that nobody knew about, that they learn about now, which is the man that runs the bookstore that Jake has gone to by the name of Calvin Tower. They realize that there's something very mysterious going on with him, because what happens is the people that were capturing Eddie's older brother for drug money, basically, and were using him as ransom to get Eddie to bring the drugs he was smuggling around over. These guys, by the name of Balazar and his cronies, basically, go into the bookstore and threaten Calvin Tower with his life because he's supposed to be selling their corporation his lot, this vacant lot that he has. And Eddie talks with Roland about this like the next day, and there's like a whole discussion as to like what exactly could be happening with this. So then in chapter 3 though, which is called Mia, while this is kind of happening, we learn that Susannah, who we've known since the second book, has been called various names like Odetta, Detta, and now Susannah, has this possible other personality named Mia that only comes around sometimes while she's sleeping. And we see basically Roland, not for the first time, kind of see what this Mia character does. She basically ends up sleepwalking in a sense to this pond and starts just eating animals left, right, and center completely raw. She's not aware of what's going on, and she's talking to herself, all these things. But what we see is this dream that she has where she's massively pregnant, going by the name of Mia, and she's talking to all these people, breaking these white and blue plates that were her aunt's special plates that she absolutely hated, all these things. And Roland doesn't see any of that, but we kind of see that. Eventually she comes back to sleep, and then when everybody finally wakes up, they start all talking about basically what's happened. And this gets up into chapter 4 called Palaver. So what happens is Eddie talks to them about the dream that they had. Roland doesn't say anything about what Susannah does. He thinks it's not necessarily something that needs to be discussed right now because it just seems to be some kind of weird thing she's been doing. He thinks that there might be something to do with that later, but now's not the time to bring it up. So they talk to him about what exactly happened. And there's like several things that keep getting brought up again with the number 19. There's a lot of signs about it, things like that. And what they realize is that the memorandum agreement of like the selling agreement of the lot that Calvin Tower has is super important because, for one, it seems that Calvin Tower is possibly from a line of people that are supposed to protect the tower. There's people that, like Roland, where he's the last gunslinger, he's the last protector of this tower, which in New York was represented by this empty lot with a rose that Jake had found. And what they realized too is that this area likely is the area of the turtle who was a guardian for the beam, and this is in the area of New York known as Turtle Bay. And there's just a lot of like revelations brought into this, and basically what they seem to understand is that Balazar is kind of this guy where he's the foot in the door, my guess is, for somebody like the Crimson King or something a little bit more nefarious. They just kind of realize like there's something very important with this particular dream and this particular person named Calvin Tower, and it's kind of just a further understanding of the fact that the tower's drawing them in. They're understanding that it's got more hands in the pot when it comes to how all these people came together than they realize, in a sense. More specifically, they see how Jake and Eddie have been really tied initially than they had ever thought of before. The only other thing that we do learn, though, is that while they're camped here, they do notice that there's people kind of sitting around and watching them, which my guess is it's just the people from this Calla area, because they, now know that these guys are here, and I guess they're going to go see them and hopefully bring them to town. Like, there's really nothing to that, just that's my guess, like, because Roland doesn't think that they're gonna hurt them or anything. They just seem to be kind of spying on them for right now, and we'll hopefully get to them soon. But yeah, that's pretty much the first 100 pages. I mean, it's not really a lot of stuff that happened, but in terms of the content, it's 100 pages worth of content. This is all building up to this whole idea. We're starting to see more things kind of pieced together. We're starting to see how the gang is specifically, why they're all tied together as this contact kind of thing. So that's kind of exciting, and I think we're going to get to pretty soon the story of these guys going to Calla Sturgis and Thunderclap and seeing kind of what they can do to help these people, because they're pretty much desperate. They don't know what to do at this point, because this is, like I said, something that happens only every once in a generation kind of thing. And the people that are there now that are like the adults and have children, they're worried about the fact that this is happening again in their lifetime, and they don't want their children to have to go through this, but they're not sure what exactly they can do. So now that they see these gunslingers, it's like, maybe they can help us. I mean, they're supposed to. They're not supposed to, like, take payment of any kind because they're descended from Arthur Eld, so maybe they can help us out with this kind of thing. Good morning, everybody. It is about 10 to 11 in the morning on Thursday the 26th. I had to think of what day it was, but I have just reached page 200 of Wolves of the Calla. I am now at the very beginning of the second part of this book. Thankfully, this entire first part ended on page 199, basically, so page 200 is like this empty page right here, so we're just gonna go with that. So let's go over the last 100 pages of this book. So basically, one thing I did forget to mention at the end of the last part was that what basically the group had decided in terms of trying to figure out how to help Calvin Tower with protecting this lot from the bad guys, which are Balazar and his cronies, is that they're going to try to see if they can buy the lot somehow, and they're not really sure what that entails. It's kind of, this goes into the next part of this chapter. All of this is technically happening in a dream where they're going back in time, so they're not really sure how this is all going to really pan out, but they do say that it has to be in cash. They have to do it in cash because, you know, it's, you know, back then they didn't do things like credit cards, and checks are kind of a little bit hokey in terms of the fact that that can be traced, and they have to go back in time further, likely to when Susannah was around, and try to see if they can get the money from like a family friend of hers, but they don't even 100% know that family friend is going to be legitimate, because they don't know if like the money that the person has is completely legitimate either. They could also be, you know, involved in like money laundering or something like that, so they don't really know. And they have to do it before July 15th of 1977, because that is when the lease for that lot goes up, and that is when it automatically goes to the corporation that that lot is under. So what they think is that this is basically going to be another door to the Dark Tower itself, which is why they want to get their hands on it, because they think it's going to have something to do with like the Dark Tower and getting themselves there. Then what happens is, in this sixth part of this chapter, the mysterious man, there's a mysterious man comes up that's called the Old Fella back from the Calla, and it turns out his name is Father Donald Callahan. He is the man from Jerusalem's lot that had escaped and had done some traveling and somehow ended in Thunderclap. We're not really sure how that happened, but he introduces himself, and Eddie and Susannah and Jake are excited because they know this guy is from their world, and he says things that are from their world, so it's very comforting. And essentially for the next several parts, Father Callahan talks to the group about essentially what is going on with the Calla and asks for their help, and he takes them to town. And for the most part, going into like chapter 5, which is called Overholzer, they go into the town, learn what's basically going on, and essentially it's that every so often, every like generation or so, these wolf-like creatures come by. They're forewarned by this animatronic robot of a sense called Andy. They're forewarned of their coming. In every generation, they take a large number of kids that go away for so long and then come back, and they're basically like shells, and they're not really any more living in a sense. They're not like normal kids. And these people don't like this. They think it's not fair. They don't understand why this happens, and these wolves are terrifying. And so they're basically asking these guys, who they're not even 100% like trustworthy of, like they just are like, okay, this is definitely a gunslinger, thinking Roland, but there's no way that Jake, for instance, is like a gunslinger, so they have to like show their will and they're like test them and everything, and it becomes very apparent to these people that these guys are like the real deal. So they basically ask them to get involved and help them with that. So then we go into chapter 6, which is called The Way of the Eld, kind of more so just looking at like the town itself, and Eddie starts to kind of not lose it per se, but there's a lot of things that are coming up as this story goes on that involves the number 19, and essentially the group starts to figure out that this is likely something that's part of their ka, and the only way they're going to continue their journey is if they do this thing. If they do this thing, it's going to somehow be a part of the journey that they have to the Dark Tower. Like, this is not just a pit stop of any kind. This is something that is super important, but they're not sure as to why. But then they find out that somewhere in this too, either in chapter 5 or this chapter, I don't quite remember, but they find out that Father Callahan has an orb of the wizard's rainbow, which we learn about in Wizard and Glass. And specifically, he has the 13th orb, which is the black orb, which is the most dangerous one of the set. And they think that that's likely what caused Eddie, Jake, and Oi to go into the Toadash and see what they saw in the Toadash earlier in the book. So it's entirely possible this is like part of the journey as well, because there obviously is a certain point that they have to meet, and this is why they think that this is part of their journey, because in order to get this orb, they have to help these people. And they start to basically plan what they're going to be doing, and then we get into chapter 7, Toadash, which is more so when Eddie kind of starts to lose it, really. He's kind of just like talking to Roland about how all of this seems to be like really important, and then everybody starts going into a Toadash. First it's Roland and Susannah's able to use her legs, and then you see Eddie and Jake and Oi come in at one point. You start to see how time in the Toadash is actually moving alongside time that they experience in Midworld, except it's going faster. And Roland, Eddie, and Jake end up going off somewhere on their own, leaving Oi and Susannah by themselves. And Susannah starts to kind of feel like things are going a little screwy, because it seems like even if she's sitting there watching a clock, it jumps forward unexpectedly, and she starts to kind of panic about that. And they start to see how like things in this area are really changing quickly, and so it's getting to be very, very apparent that they have to be quick, because the faster that time moves in this Toadash, the less time they then have to get the money that they need to buy the lot that they're looking for to then get to the Dark Tower, or save it to, you know, allow a door to be open to the Dark Tower. But they can't do a lot of that until obviously they solve this problem with the Wolves of the Calla, basically. You can see that as the longer Susannah's left with Oi by themselves, she starts to kind of fragment. She starts to kind of have like a bit of a mental break in a sense. And at some point I think Eddie, Roland, and Jake find the rose that Jake had seen when he was originally making his way to Midworld in this lot that he had seen, and they start to see kind of everything that there is within the world and other worlds, because this rose is basically supposed to be a signifier of the Dark Tower, and so it's filled with information about this world, other worlds, you know, that kind of a thing. And then what they realize is that Susannah seems to be in trouble, so they go back to her, and she's freaking out. There's this naked guy that's been like standing not far from her, and he's really scary to her, and she doesn't know how to react to it, because she's just like, I feel like I'm losing my mind. And Roland starts to think maybe it has something to do with this Mia character, this Mia side of Susannah that is coming up, because Susannah had basically thought that the personalities of Odetta and Detta were pretty much done and away with. Detta coming up only every once in a while with like certain things and personality aspects, but Mia is like a whole other can of worms that Susannah's not really aware of as of yet, but Roland is. So then they basically wake up from this Toadash, and everybody's kind of like, Holy crap. This is kind of crazy. And they find this bowling bag that looks like it used to be Jake's, but it's not quite. It's not the same one, but what it says on the side is nothing but strikes at Midworld lanes. Jake says it's not the same because his said nothing but strikes at Midtown lanes, which was the bowling alley he had gone to. And obviously there's something in this bag, but Roland's like, all right, we all need to actually sleep. Like, we're not going to go into a toe dash again. We need to, like, sleep. We're going to be really busy for the next few weeks, however, because it's going to take them time to learn the land and understand kind of what to expect with these wolves that are coming in. And this is basically, I think, where they're going to start massively getting involved with the wolves and taking care of them before they're able to continue on their journey. But I have a distinct feeling that this Mia side of Susannah is not only going to play a lot into this story, but may even go into the next book, which is called Song of Susannah, because based on that title alone and seeing what's happening here, it becomes very apparent to me that this is something that's going to stick with us for a while and could maybe try to derail things for this team, but I'm not 100% sure. But that's basically all there is. Again, the last 100 pages, not really a lot seemed to happen, but the majority of this 100 pages was going through this toe dash, and the rest was learning more so about the Calla, meeting Father Callahan, and basically understanding that this team has one big journey that's going to then get them involved with being able to go save the Rose. And I think that that's like the big thing, is like we're gonna have to go through this whole wolves aspect, which is going to get them the 13th orb, which is going to cause them to be able to go into the toe dash again several more times. And from there, they're going to be able to go back in time to Susannah's time to get the money they need, get it in cash, and then go back to Jake's time to then pay off the lease and buy the lot that the tower is at before July 15th of 1977. That's kind of the idea that's going on with this story, is my guess. And again, I don't know whether or not this whole Mia aspect is going to play into this entire story, and I would be even more surprised if it didn't have anything to do with what goes on in book 6, because since it's called Song of Susannah, there seems to be something very apparent with that character in that book. So I feel like there's going to be a lot of things going on in this one and the next book about this Mia personality, whatever you want to call it, because I have a distinct feeling it's going to be another challenge that is going to threaten to derail everything. My only question then is how exactly does this character arc come in? What is it about this time, and does it have something to do with the 13th orb that is causing this personality to come up? I'm not sure. I have a feeling it may have something to do with the orb, because the Wizard's Rainbow orbs are incredibly powerful. I mean, we saw how in Wizarding Glass, the pink orb was really powerful and how it was almost devastating in a way for not just Roland, but for Rhea of the Coos and anybody that touched it. It basically caused massive issues. So I'm curious to see if this 13th black orb is not only causing these guys to go into the toe dash, but is it possible it's bringing up this other personality that's been hidden away, that's much more dangerous and evil in Susannah?
Hi guys, it's about 3:20 now in the afternoon, and I've just reached page 300 of Wolves of the Calla, and honestly, this is getting to be a book where there's not a lot that happens within 100 pages, but there is, because it's not like I said before where there's a lot of events. There's large chunks of this book that are like all based in kind of one idea or one time frame, and so it feels like there's not a lot going on, but there is. So let's go over the last 100 pages. So starting off the second part of this book called Telling Tales, which pretty much is so far what this whole part has been about. People telling various stories and things that like are about themselves or about the town, stuff like that. We start off chapter 1, the Pavilion, where the team rides into Calla Sturgis, and they start basically meeting the people, getting a lay of the land, kind of understanding what exactly there is to know about this town, and learn from the people kind of what the main objective is, which is to take care of the wolves and getting everybody to,
look at them and understand that, you know, they're here to help, and many people offer their homes to them to let them lodge there for the next couple of weeks. And they start off though where they're going to stay in the church that Father Callahan has in this area. Then we get into chapter 2 that's called Dry Twist, and this entire chapter is mostly about how Roland, we start to see, is starting to basically, in a sense, age and break down. So what we learned in the second book, which was the Drawing of the Three, was Roland was slowly getting sicker and sicker because of an infection he had obtained through the lobstrosities, because after he had lost his fingers and some toes, he basically became infected with this venom that these lobstrosities had, and Eddie was trying to revive him more so as time went on, and a little bit into the third book, The Wastelands, that still was kind of coming up and, you know, stuff like that. Here now, we start to realize that Roland is starting to basically develop arthritis in his hip and his knee. The woman in the town that basically works for Father Callahan gives him this salve that he can use, and it works basically like Icy Hot or Bengay or whatever you want to call it, but unfortunately it's not something that is long lasting, and he realizes that he's gonna have to eventually tell Eddie, Susannah, and Jake about this problem he's having. And then what happens is, over this entire time, especially going through the town, Roland starts to realize he's got to also tell Eddie about what's going on with Susan. Susan is getting worse. Like, there was a time when they were working through town where she grabbed her stomach and looked like she was going to be sick. And Eddie doesn't seem to be necessarily as upset about it. It's just more of the fact that, like, he's kind of been thinking something was wrong, but he wasn't sure. And so they start thinking that if it's true that Susannah's pregnant, it's entirely possible it's not Eddie's, and it's very possible that it is the child of this entity that they had fought with in the Wastelands that basically was causing Jake to be encumbered when it came to him coming over into Midworld. So they think that that is likely the case. Because Susannah's still having her period, she's still, you know, acting as if she's a normal woman. It's just every now and then she gets little pains and it feels to her like it's gas, but it's not. And Roland explains the dreams that she's been having and how at night she kind of sleepwalks and goes and eats animals raw, basically, like kills them and eats them raw. And they obviously are a little concerned. They're not sure really what to do with it. It's just kind of something that they're going to have to figure out as they go. It's not something they can really figure out anything about currently. And Eddie even realizes, like, that when it comes to the Dark Tower, Susannah is not somebody that he's going to necessarily save. And that's kind of been a thought that's come up many times, is that if they're all going to the Dark Tower, they're all likely to die for Roland, and Eddie's not going to be able to save his wife. So he does say to Roland, though, that hopefully, you know, if it comes to this, I need you to be the one to, like, make a decision of what to do, kind of thing, because I'm not going to be able to. Roland talks about how there's this other woman within Susannah, Mia, and he says that whatever it is, Mia thinks of it as her baby, talking about the child inside Susannah, and she'll protect it to the limit of her strength and life. If that means taking over Susannah's body the way Detta Walker sometimes took over Odetta Holmes, she'll do it if she can. Basically just a forewarning that this is likely to happen because Mia seems to be a gaining force within Susannah. And then from there, we have Roland have Father Callahan start retelling his story, because Father Callahan, when they first met him, was really, for some reason, just wanting to tell his story to them about how exactly he got there, because obviously it's a little interesting considering how he's from Eddie, Susannah, and Jake's world, and so they're curious as to how this man got into Midworld and specifically into Calla Bryn Sturgis. And so he goes through this whole thing where after the events of Salem's Lot, he goes to New York. He's figured out that there are 3 types of vampires. There's the ones that were originally there with Barlow, there's the ones that Barlow turned, and then there's these kind of almost hybrid vampires, and he doesn't quite know how to explain it. It's kind of one of those things where they're not human, but they're not vampire either. There's some weird mix of the two. He talks even about how things had gone in Salem's Lot a little bit, and how when he first had got there, he had an alcohol problem. And this is something that he talks about frequently because alcohol has kind of been the thing that's been his crutch. And you see over this story that he tells of, especially his time in New York, how he struggles with it, how it is something that is constantly in the back of his mind. A lot of this is basically, he talks about these type 3 vampires that he sees over the course of time, and how eventually, while he's in New York, he starts killing these type 3 vampires because he's able to see them. He knows what they look like. And at one point, he even says that he falls in love with a young man that he meets while he's in New York. And when he finds out that this friend that he's fallen in love with contracts basically AIDS, it makes it very hard for him, and is the reason why he goes back to drinking, basically, because it's hard for him to cope with that. And he kind of thinks that there's a link between the type 3 vampires and the AIDS epidemic. So he describes the type 1 being ones that live very long lives and may spend extended periods, 50 years, 100, maybe 200, in deep hibernation. When they're active, they're capable of making new vampires, which are the type 2 ones. They're the undead, the people that are turned into vampires. Those ones are also capable of making new vampires, but they're not as cunning. These type 2s can create type 3s, which are like mosquitoes. They can't create more vampires, but they just feed and feed and feed on people. And this is where kind of the AIDS thing comes up, because Eddie asks about if they can contract AIDS at all. And he said that he didn't know about that until the spring of 1983. He says that they can get sick from it, they can have it, and they can pass it on to other people, which is basically how his friend Lupe ends up contracting it, is he gets bitten by one of these possibly type 3s and he gets sick. And what's interesting is that this guy Lupe's last name was Delgado, which, if you know anything that happened in Wizard and Glass, Roland's lover, the woman that he fell in love with when he was young, was named Susan Delgado. So that's a very kind of strange thing to kind of see this come up. But we learn about Lupe and Father Callahan, and he ends up just kind of traveling. He leaves New York and goes out to this like New Jersey area for a while. And it's while he's still in New York City that Father Callahan starts actually killing some of these type 3 people, and he gets to be able to kill about 6 of these type 3 people before he starts seeing signs looking out for him. People are starting to look at him a little funny, and he realizes he's being stalked by some kind of group. We're not really sure what happens, but somebody is specifically looking for him. And so we realize he's being chased by the type 3 vampires, a group that's basically called the Vagrant Dead. They're basically spirits that can't realize that they're dead. They're just very strange things, which is that naked man that Susannah had saw when she was in the Todash, earlier. That's what's called a Vagrant Dead. And now there's this third group, which it turns out those people Father Callahan talks about are what are called low men in yellow coats. Now, this is a phrase I've heard a couple of different times, and that's because in a short story collection called Hearts in Atlantis, there is a very particular story, the first story in there, mind you, that talks about these guys that are low men in yellow coats. And essentially what they are is they are servants of the Crimson King. They are the posse, the henchmen, if you will. And it turns out that the big coffin hunters are a subgroup of the low men in yellow coats. So this makes a lot of sense going back to Wizard and Glass, because the big coffin hunters were working for John Farson, who somehow was working for the Crimson King, which we had known, but we didn't know exactly how the big coffin hunters played into all of this. So essentially what we realize is, if you've read Hearts in Atlantis, if you've read also Insomnia, those low men in yellow coats are also talked about in that book, because they are the ones looking for the main character in that story. There's a lot more ties to the Dark Tower now, because now we have a tie to Insomnia, we have a tie to Hearts in Atlantis, and again, various other works, because these henchmen are being used to go into these different worlds to find these certain people that the Crimson King says are dangerous, or something along those lines. So, very interesting information there that I thought was cool, because I tried to read Insomnia a few years ago and I didn't care for it and I DNF'd it, but I read Hearts in Atlantis a couple years before that and I really, really liked it. So I thought that was a very cool tie to see in there. And Roland does ask at one point, before the group ends up basically leaving the church to head into town to meet with some other people, if the wolves are at all possibly these low men in yellow coats, basically. And Father Callahan says he's not 100% sure, but it's possible. Like, he doesn't know, like, at all 100%, but it's entirely possible that these wolf characters are somehow servants to the Crimson King. That's pretty plain, but they're not sure whether it's the same people. They talk about how it's entirely possible that Roland's group is going to end up taking Father Callahan with them to Thunderclap, because obviously Father Callahan knows that Thunderclap is a big place where these wolves are taking these kids, and so it's likely that that is where they are being housed and like where most of the wolves are. So it's likely that because Roland and his gang are already heading there, they're going to end up basically running into these things, and so it's likely that Father Callahan's going to provide some kind of information to help them on this journey when they go to Thunderclap and deal with these wolves, going on from their journey from there. So then we get into chapter 4, which is continuing the Priest Tale. It's the Priest Tale continued, Highways and Hiding. And what we learn is that after he gets on the footbridge heading toward New Jersey, everything seems to be basically deserted for a while, and then he ends up working at this restaurant for a few weeks, and then he gets kind of this bug where he decides he's going to move on again, and the owner thinks that, you know, he's a good guy, he wants to help him, he wants him to stay at least another week to give him a little bit more money before he heads on his way, and that's basically it. I mean, because we only read the first 2 parts of the 4th chapter here in this second part of the book, so not much really has happened other than more storytelling. This is basically all being told as they are going from the back of the church into town. So the book says that this takes about 5 minutes for Callahan to tell. Obviously, it's not an actual 5-minute story. It's very drawn out, but the way that Callahan tells it to, you know, the rest of the group is that it's within the span of like 5 minutes, so that's going to be interesting. But so it seems like there is a lot to do with this Father Callahan character, which doesn't surprise me, because him being brought up at all begs the question of how exactly does he get to Midworld, which is what his whole story here is. And I'm guessing that just like with Wizard and Glass, where the majority of that book was a lot of backstory, I feel like this book is going to continue in that fashion for quite some time, and we're not going to actually get to the fighting with the wolves until probably about 3/4 of the way through the book, and then like we'll get through that very quickly, and then we'll see Roland and his gang deal with the lot either in this book at the end or in the beginning of Song of Susannah. Not really sure how that's going to go, but I have a feeling that this is all going to take a while to get to anyway, because what it seems like is there's going to be a lot of backstory about specifically Father Callahan, and I don't know whether that's going to play into more of an understanding of how to defeat the wolves, or if it's going to provide more information to Roland about any of it. So, good morning, everybody. It is Sunday, August 29th, I think. Holy crap, it's been a hot minute since I've been able to talk to you guys. The last few days have been not my best. Been kind of busy and not really in the mood to film at all, even though I reached the last 100-page mark like several days ago, which we reached page 402. Are continuing on with the story of Father Callahan, where basically like he was on the road for about 5 years going through different areas, and most of this chapter we've been in is more of him traveling, and he ends up having to like stop his tale because we don't actually learn exactly how he gets to Calla and Sturgis as of yet. We just learned that like a lot of his traveling was because he was being chased and he had to find ways to get around them and away from them, and before he's able to talk more about what he needs to do, they have to basically go and talk to other people in this town about, you know, the lay of the land, how they're going to plan for this upcoming attack by the wolves, which is supposed to be in like a few weeks basically. And then Father Callahan and Roland decide to go inside the church because there's something inside the church that Father Callahan wants to show him, which is the Wizard's Rainbow, the ball that he has, black number 13. And it's inside this box that is made of ghost wood, which Roland hasn't really seen ghost wood in a hot minute. It's been something that is like almost otherworldly in a sense. Like, it's very rare to find something like that. And there's a note on it that basically says unfound. The symbols that are on it, to Roland it shows a rose, a stone, and a door, but to Father Callahan it shows a leaf, a stone, and a door, and to him they're symbols from a book called Look Homeward, Angel. And Father Callahan asks if Roland will take the wizard's rainbow, and he says he will eventually, but, you know, they have to obviously go through what they need to go through with the wolves first before he can take it, because it's not the most important thing, and they did agree to help this town with their problem. Then we go into chapter 5, which is called The Tale of Grey Dick. So they go to this place that is the Eisenhart family's home, and that he talks to the man of the house and Margaret, who is the woman of the house. And it turns out, basically through this chapter, we learn that there are some women in this town who are kind of like warriors. They're not really 100% called that, but they are weapon wielders of a sort. They have this gray disc that is serrated mostly throughout, and there's like one spot that they're able to hold on to, and it basically tosses like a frisbee. And there's only a handful of women that are able to do this, one of which is Margaret. Another is, I believe, the wife of the man we meet in the beginning of the story, who is like one of the farmers of this town. And there's a couple other women that are able to do this, but not many. And they talk about the story of Grey Dick, which essentially is a story about Lady Oriza, who is one of their goddesses in this town, and how she invites him in. He was an outlaw prince, and she wanted to forgive him for the murder of her father, for she had accepted the man Jesus into her heart, and such was according to his teachings. And eventually, while she is hosting this man, he becomes really overrun with lust. I think she basically just offers him to like have sex with her, and they do, but they don't know that Lady Oriza had tried for several days now tossing this particular disc that these other women use. She kills this guy Grey Dick, and it's essentially the start of these women that are able to wield this disc and basically use it as a weapon. And you learn that there's other people, like I said, that over time had used it, you know, kind of a thing. It's been passed down, and they end up basically having Margaret show how she uses it and what it's able to do. And it's like a really big thing, because especially in this town, there's kind of this patriarchal kind of idea where the women aren't really looked upon as like a warrior. They're definitely the women that, you know, take care of the house, take care of the kids, all that kind of stuff, and the men are the ones that are being looked at to obviously be the warriors. And so especially when they see Susannah as a gunslinger, it's very odd to them. And on top of that, she's a black woman, and they're not really accustomed to this. Roland, after seeing how this disc works, tries to talk to Eisenhart and Margaret about the idea that the need for where it comes, we are going to likely need the women to step in as warriors, because at this point they've already started to determine that there's not very many warriors, there's not really any weapons involved in this town. And so in order for them to be able to feel like they're gonna have a good chance against these wolves, they need all the weapons and all the help they can get. So then we go into chapter 6, which is Grandparent's Tale, and this is where Eddie and Susannah basically go over to the Jaffords, which are the family that we see in the beginning of the story. And essentially we just learn a little bit about the family, how they're set up, and there is this old man who is named, they call him Grandparent, and Eddie starts to talk to him about essentially one of the first times that the grandparent had ever seen the wolves. And it was when he was about 19 or so, I think he said, and it's just this whole story of how they were trying to fight against the wolves. He and a few friends were planning on fighting against the wolves, one of which was a couple. It was a married couple, and the woman was Molly Doolin, and she was another woman that was able to wield one of those discs. And basically they tried to fight him off, and the old man was the only one out of his friends to survive. His other three friends were all killed very gruesomely, and it kind of is something that haunts him to this day. It's a story that he doesn't really tell a lot of people, because it's, for one, really hurtful because he lost some of the most important people in his life, and two, it was just something that he has a lot of guilt for, because they were able to kill one wolf, but before this old man was able to really unmask it and see what was under the mask, the body like disintegrated basically. So nobody really knows who's behind the masks, who's behind the wolves in general. There's thoughts that it's linked to the Crimson King, but they have really no idea. And that's pretty much the majority of that chapter, or pretty much the entirety of that chapter. And then we go into chapter 7, which is Nocturne Hunger, and we start seeing that Mia's coming around again. She's basically, you know, starting to cause Susannah to sleepwalk again. This time Eddie sees it and he's able to understand exactly what happens, and she ends up killing one of the pigs that is in the Jaffords' home, but Eddie tries to play it off like nothing happened, that it just all of a sudden got taken up by something. And also what happened is you see that Jake was actually the one in the nightmare itself that Mia was conjuring up. Jake was the one that was watching it happen. Eddie only woke up to see Susannah basically walking out of the barn that they were sleeping in and going to kill the pig. Jake was the one, though, that saw the nightmare itself like Roland had. And so he's kind of freaking out. He doesn't know what this means, and he does approach Roland about it, and Roland's like, you need to keep your mouth shut. Eddie already knows about what's going on. We can't tell Susannah about this right now, but when the time comes, we will tell her about it. But for right now, it is not our highest priority. We need to figure out what exactly is going on, because if it does have something to do with what's going on currently, like the Wizard's Rainbow or something, then we can bring it up. But for now, it's not something we really need to worry about. And then we get into chapter 8, which is called Took Store, The Unfound Door. The last part that I'm able to read until we reach page 402 is that all 4 of our friends end up basically separating. Roland heads out into the mountains with this person to go to Calla, which is another area of the Calla, and they're checking it out, seeing, you know, there's this cave that they're thinking that they can hide the children in for when the wolves come by, and they're gonna go check it out, make sure that's 100% what they need. And they end up having the rest of them, Eddie, Susannah, and Jake, head over to Took's store to basically just go get some supplies, make sure they have what they need, that kind of a thing, and then they basically split off. And that is where we end up with page 402. So far it's interesting. It's a little slow, I think, compared to how I felt with Wizard and Glass. It's just, I feel like there's a lot of information that we need to learn about this town and the people involved in it. Like I said, it's not so much a prequel story like Wizard and Glass was, or The Wind Through the Keyhole. It's more of a prequel in the sense that you're learning a lot about the people that are involved and the town itself, because that plays a huge role into how exactly the wolves play into this whole thing. So that's more so the prequel-ness of this story. Now, whether or not we get a lot more information about the Wizard's Rainbow, and whether or not we actually see them head off to Thunderclap, is probably not going to be until the very end of the book, similar to what happened with Wizard and Glass, where we really didn't see a lot of the actual journey of the team until toward the very end, after we learned everything about Roland and Susan. So that's kind of the idea I'm getting with this. Now, I only say it's a little slow because it does seem like parts of the story drag a little bit more than I'm comfortable with. I feel like there's quite a bit of stuff that could have been cut out. There seems to be a long stretch of time between when they are and when the wolves are supposed to arrive, and I feel like that makes it harder to enjoy the pacing of it, because it's different to have something happen like a week from the time that you're talking about than it is 3 weeks, for instance. So if you've got like 3 weeks until something's due, it's a lot easier to feel like you're not as much panic. But when it comes to like a week or a few days before something is due, you definitely start to panic a little bit more. The stakes are a little bit higher, kind of a thing. So I kind of wish that the timeline between when the wolves get there and, you know, where they are now would be shorter, only because I feel like that would raise the stakes a little bit more. It's overall not really that big of a deal. It's just kind of, I think, a personal preference, because I feel like that would just make things a little bit more fast-paced, a little bit more intense, but it's honestly, the way it is, not too bad to where, like, it's, I think, 100% worthy of knocking down a star. Maybe that will change with more reading of it, because now I'm over halfway through the book, but I don't know. We'll see kind of how that goes.
Hello, friends. It is, oh god, that clock in here doesn't work anymore. It's after 9 o'clock at night, I think, and I've reached page 500. There is a Calla sitting right here. This is her butt basically. So say hi to Kaya. Eddie, Susannah, and Jake were going to be going to the store to get some stuff, and they basically get some supplies, some clothing. I have a cat who is trying to get my attention now, and Kaya's not okay with it. So excuse the animals running around and making noises. Basically, they go into the general store to get some supplies and stuff, and it's very apparent that the town has really got to understand that these people, this group, is important. They're going to be basically the saviors of this town, and so they kind of get the celebrity status thing kind of coming up and about. And a couple parts later, we go to Roland, who is going toward basically this cave area that one of the townspeople says that he found Father Callahan at. And they go into basically learning about the story of how exactly Father Callahan got to Calla Sturgis. And they say that there was this box that they found with him that contained essentially the Black 13th ball of the Wizard's Rainbow, and how they kind of looked into it and it seemed evil. They don't know necessarily how Father Callahan got there, but you learn exactly how he got there later on in the book, essentially, as to how he got, especially in this cave area. Then we go into chapter 9, which goes into the rest of the priest's tale. It's called The Priest's Tale Concluded, Unfound. After it was found out that a friend of his was attacked basically by what were called the Hitler Brothers, which were a group of white men who would attack people who were either black or Jewish, were friends of black and Jewish people, basically. Meets his friend's twin sister, who looks almost exactly like him, and shortly after his friend actually ends up dying by succumbing to his injuries, he gets attacked by these Hitler Brothers. And these people that attack him then get attacked by some other group of people that we're not sure who they are, but Father Callahan is basically able to get away. But in his adventures and trying to stay away from these Hitler Brothers, he's still trying to get away from these low men in yellow coats, and it's really hard for him to. And eventually he ends up going to this like job interview thing that he thinks is going to be really important and make him a lot of money to where he can get set up in Detroit. And it turns out this basically is being run by the low men in yellow coats, and he ends up falling out of a window and supposedly falling to his death. But Jake recognizes that this is something similar to what he experienced, where he thought he had died, but then woke up in the way station at the very beginning of The Gunslinger. And this is something that is not necessarily, again, like I said, abnormal, because Jake is understanding of it. He understands that whatever must have happened to Father Callahan led him to be brought into Midworld the first time, which to him was when he woke up in the cave near Calla Sturgis. And that's basically all we learn from that. And after learning about that, we realize that Susannah learns and knows and has known for a while that she is pregnant and likely has this other personality involved named Mia. And they don't really say anything about it exactly at first. They're just kind of like, we're going to not talk about it for right now. It's not super important. But Roland later goes to Father Callahan to talk about what are some like possible answers to this problem. And Father Callahan's like, well, you can't abort it because it's against my religious views. I think it's a sin, and nobody here is going to let that happen, even though the town itself wouldn't really like the idea of Susannah carrying a demon child as well. So there's kind of no good way to go about this, and there's just something, it's basically they've really come to the conclusion that there's nothing they can do about this right now, and they just have to hope that this baby doesn't come out before the events with the wolves, because if it does, that can spell some big trouble. We get into this well into part 3, the wolves, starting with chapter 1, which is called Secrets. And like I said, we learn about, exactly what everyone thinks of in terms of like how the town would view this demon child, and how what Father Callahan says they should do about it, because there's no one good way to go about this without pissing somebody off, basically. And they come to the decision that they can't really do anything about it currently because it's just not the right time. There's too many other things going on. And apparently Miss Kaya has decided she really wants to make her entrance in this video, haven't you? You want to be the center of attention with everything, don't you? Yeah, that's what I thought. Good thing she's cute. Hi. So then what they basically decide to do is Roland gets several of the women involved that are well versed with using this disc, and they kind of start to have this competition. Susannah learns how to use it and is like absolutely amazing at it. She doesn't take very long to get the hang of it and becomes way better than most of the women in this town that are supposed to know how to use it. And they put these women to a test to see like who's going to be likely to be called upon if they need warriors other than the men already in this town. Roland learns from Eddie the secret from Grandparent's story that he learned of earlier, where it has something to do with one of the wolves. We as the reader don't really know what that is as of yet, but obviously it's super important because Roland learns of it and he's like, this is our ticket to possibly winning. This is how we're going to be able to use this information, and they're kind of waiting for the right time to use that information. And that's basically it. You know, we just go through the event of the women going through and showcasing their talent with these discs, and that's pretty much all we learn. The next part basically goes on from after all of that is over, and I am currently being shoved by this dog for attention, so I'm gonna go give her some attention like she wants, because she's very needy, as you can tell, and it's also getting close to her bedtime, I think, which is partially why she's getting very needy. But just look at her cute little face. You're so sweet. Look at you. I love you. Kaya, can you say hello? Say hi to all the people in the camera. Don't really know how I feel about it. I'm kind of still sitting somewhere between like a 3, maybe 3.5 out of 5 stars with this, just because I feel like all of this backstory is really kind of tedious at this point, and I just hope that there is some kind of payoff to all of it by the end of this, and if there isn't, I'm going to be sorely disappointed in that. I feel like this may have been the one that most people, when it came to the Dark Tower, said was their least favorite, just because of a lot of this backstory that was involved.
Hello everybody, it is now just after 1:30 in the afternoon on Tuesday, August 31st. I am cutting it down to the wire, truthfully, with this one, but I have just reached page 601 of Wolves of the Calla, so let's go over the last 100 pages. Starting off at the end of the event, basically, with the women testing out their discs and everything. Everybody says that they're basically going home, and essentially what Jake and the team decide is they're going to have basically Jake watch over this man that is the father of his friend Benny that is in this town, because they believe that Benny's dad may have something to do with what is going on in this town. They think he may be a bit of a traitor of some kind, but they don't know how, they don't know why, they just know that this is something that Jake needs to do, while the rest of them end up getting like the stuff together to prepare for the wolves coming here fairly soon. Eddie decides that he needs to go to New York to be able to talk to Calvin Tower, because they are aware that time passes in New York in 1977 a lot faster than it does in Calla Bryn Sturgis, where they are now in Midworld. And so Eddie believes that it's important for him to go back to New York, check on what time it is during, like, in the timeline, make sure that they have enough time to be able to save Calvin Tower and the tower. And essentially from there, Eddie goes into the past again in chapter 2, which is called The Dogan Part 1. And basically Eddie goes back to New York with the help of Roland and saves Calvin from basically getting attacked by a couple of Balazar's men, and convinces Calvin to move away from this place to keep him safe. And he takes his friend Deepno with him off to somewhere in Maine, and they don't know exactly where he is. They just said that he needs to go away for a little while before this money thing comes up where the tower gets resold to the Sambara people, and he has to refuse it. And he does say he's going to refuse it and sell it instead to Eddie, but he has to basically go into hiding for a little while before that happens. And that happens for most of this entire chapter. And then we go back to having Eddie go back into Calla Bryn Sturgis much later. So then basically we get to like part 15 of this chapter, and Eddie goes back to Roland and Calla Bryn Sturgis, and they decide that, you know, they're going to leave it for there for now, and hopefully, you know, Calvin ends up running away and they'll get to him again at some other point, because right now they've got other stuff to deal with. They have to still deal with the wolves and figure out what's going on with that. Eddie and Roland, though, in the last part of this chapter talk about, you know, the fact that Jake's going to have to go and figure out what exactly Benny's dad is doing, and Roland's like, you know, that's kind of his job. We can't really do anything to help him with that. That's on him. Which, going into chapter 3, which is called The Dogan Part 2, is pretty much the entirety of it Jake going to track down essentially the area that Benny's dad goes to every night. And the reason they know it's him is because he is the only man in this town that wears spectacles, and nobody knows really where he got them. And so they think that it might have something to do with, you know, if he's made a deal with the people that are the wolves, or, you know, the Crimson King or something like that. And Jake, up to this point, has been seeing Benny's dad meeting up with Andy, the robot that runs around Calla and Sturgis, and, you know, seems to be a pretty decent thing. It talks about, you know, horoscopes a lot, all that stuff, but it's very clear that this robot is not really on their side, because the only other thing it really does is let the town know when the wolves are going to be coming to them to take the children. So basically, Oi and Jake end up tracing steps back to this place called a Dogan. It's like kind of a headquarters of sorts, and you go in, and apparently there's all of these cameras. There's several cameras set up hidden around the Calla and Sturgis, and it's kind of like tracking people and things. And they go in there, and then Benny's dad and Andy end up showing up, and Jake and Oi hide away in like a little room in this Dogan, and they essentially turn on the computer and they give this progress report to somebody named Algal Ciento Finley Otago. Like, that's kind of like they're two separate names of some kind. And there's a progress report that they talk about where Slightman says that the Father Callahan may have books or maps of some kind that are going to lead them to Thunderclap, whether that means that they have a lay of the land of Thunderclap, that they're going to invade it. Nobody really knows. Like, it's very confusing as to like what all of this means. And he also talks about how Roland has been setting up the plan to hide the kids in one of the mines to, you know, hide them from the wolves. And so it's kind of saying that there's possibility they'll be in this mine, or more likely this one, kind of a thing. Like, this guy is basically giving this information to somebody who may have to do with the wolves and their impending arrival. And after they leave, Jake is able to leave as well and head back to Benny's house where he was staying the night, and nobody is the wiser of the fact that Oi and Jake went out there. Then we go into chapter 4, which is called The Pied Piper, and from here, Callahan ends up going with Roland to New York. This is because that they are looking to find out where Calvin had gone. They at least know that he's in Maine, but they're looking to see where in Maine he might be. And so this is the first time, though, that Callahan has been in New York since he had fallen out the window and wound up in Calla and Sturgis. This is a really important thing for him. And so he gets to see the place. They find out that Calvin's bookstore has been burned down, and they just kind of are trying to figure out where exactly Calvin is. And they find a zip code at the very least in the rubble of the burned down bookstore, and that's kind of all we learn. And that's where we end off on page 601 at the beginning of chapter 5, which is called The Meeting of the Falcon. Okay guys, it is done. Wolves of the Calla is finally finished, and thank God, the last 100 and some pages of this, there was actually some fighting going on, and we get to see the wolves, so that has made this book way better. That made up for a lot of the crap that was in this book, to be completely honest. And I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars. It wasn't really that bad. It was actually really good. I did like a lot of what was going on with it. The only thing, like I said before, is that the whole middle of it and learning everything about Father Callahan and the long time it took to get to the actual end of this just felt a little dragging at times, but overall was really, really fun to read. So let's go over the last 100 pages because, oh boy, the ending of this left off on some pretty dire circumstances, let me tell you. So starting off chapter 5, The Meeting of the Falcon, essentially this chapter is when Roland and the gang get the entirety of the town together to basically have a final call to arms, in a sense, of this battle. They're asking people to trust them, to put their trust in them, and to listen to them, because they are essentially going to take these kids and essentially use them as part of their plan. They're going to try to find a way to protect them while making it so that they can, you know, attack the wolves. And it's a very interesting thing. Like, you've got people that are for it, you've got people that are against it, and it's just a very much big town hall kind of scene where, like, just everybody's putting their 2 cents in. Roland's telling everybody what's exactly happening. The one thing though that he does is he tells them that these wolves are essentially what Eddie, Susannah, and Jake call zombies. Now, this is not exactly the case. It does get revealed later what they actually are, but to make things a little easier on these people, they do lie about who the wolves really are, but they do say that they're from Thunderclap, that, you know, they are dangerous, and they will be handled, essentially. The reasoning behind why they say that they're zombies as opposed to what they actually are until later is not clear. I think it's to make it so that, you know, people don't look further into this whole thing. I'm not really 100% sure what that is, but there's a lot of concern with Susannah because Susannah is slowly also starting to have cramps, and she's, you know, having essentially what I would think are at first like Braxton Hicks contractions, I think is what they're called, and then later on we actually see she starts having real contractions, which is not good. But going into chapter 6, which is called Before the Storm, we get everybody together to finalize the stuff that's going on, and we have Callahan and Eddie going into Toadash again so that we can get some other stuff figured out super quick before all hell breaks loose, basically. So they basically go back to New York, and they end up then going to Maine, to this area where Calvin and Deep Note are supposed to be. Callahan leaves them a note to say that they were here and to basically meet in this area here in like the next couple of days because they're going to be coming back to check on them, and, you know, it's going to make it easier for them to stay safe, kind of a thing. And then when they get back, Callahan and Eddie start basically getting stuff together to prepare for this whole thing. Now, one thing that they also do is Eddie goes with Tian Jafferts to go to Andy because they all know that Andy is behind a lot of what's been happening with this wolf thing, and they tell him that there's a bunch of, you know, guns that they're looking to use as weaponry, and they need Andy to come help, and he says that he's happy to. And it's kind of a plan that they have in store for Andy for later, like something like they're gonna like get the jump on him, basically. Then it comes to the day before the wolves are supposed to come, and Susannah is still saying, you know, she's feeling fine, nothing's really wrong, and then what happens is Andy comes by to help everybody out, and Eddie basically gets the jump on him and destroys him, and then also has him shut down. They shut him off, and that way he's not able to go to the wolves for anything, you know, stuff like that. And then everybody sleeps that night, and the next day is, in chapter 7, the beginning of the fight. And so everybody gets kind of together. There's this big group of people that head out toward the caves that they were saying that they were going to put the kids in, and they're basically, though, going to actually put them in the rice field because the rice field's a little bit safer and it'll hide the scent of the kids a little bit easier so that the wolves don't find them. But this also gives Roland, Eddie, Susannah, and Jake the opportunity to use the rice field as kind of a cover for when the wolves come by and they can surprise them. And basically this entire chapter is them raining hell on these wolves, and it doesn't start off very well because at one point Jake, who is with a couple of the other kids kind of leading the pack, one of them breaks his ankle and also hits his head, and it's hard for them to be able to get back to where they're supposed to be, so they nearly don't make it. And then unfortunately, Benny, he ends up actually unfortunately dying in all of this. They only have a couple of casualties, thank God, but it causes Jake to basically go berserk, kind of similar to what Eddie had done when Eddie had seen his brother die in the second book, or when they had thrown his brother's head into the fight, essentially proving to him that Henry was dead. Kind of a similar feeling where Jake kind of goes catatonic almost, but then just complete rage and anger. And right before all this happens, Roland does tell the parents that are basically helping to shield the kids that these wolves are actually robots, and they're robots that are similar to the ones we've seen before back in the beginning of the Wastelands, where there was the bear Shardik that had the little, like, it looked like little top hat on the top of his head, and they realize that it's what they've dealt with before, so they all know how to handle it, and it gives everybody the chance to be able to go and kill these things. And They don't know necessarily if they've killed all of them, because there could be still some in Thunderclap, but this town now knows how to kill these things, and so it's very easy for them to be able to protect themselves from this point. And then in the course of this too, Susannah starts to feel Mia come up. But she says, if you let me get through this fight, I will let you have this kid, you know, this chap, whatever that it is you want to call it, but you need to let me get through this fight at the very least. And when the fight's over, Mia then takes over and Susannah goes missing. And the very end of this book, everyone's starting to realize that she's gone, and they realize there's a whole epilogue to this. They realize that Susannah has actually gone over to New York. She's taken the Wizard's Rainbow, the black orb that was hiding in the cave with the door that leads to New York, essentially, and she's gone. And so at first, Roland's like, we can't deal with that right now. We have to get back to Calvin and Deep No, but Eddie is hell-bent on going to find his wife. He is like, I am not doing this without her, and that kid could kill her in some capacity, whether, you know, it actually is a demon cannibalistic child of some kind and eat her, or at the very least, I want to be there to, like, protect her if, you know, something were to happen. So Roland, though, then concedes, and he's like, all right, we're gonna go get her, and that is where the Wolves of the Calla ends. Now here's a couple things that did pop up that I thought were really interesting. So one thing that they see over the course of this fighting with the wolves, there's this idea that there are these like little bug things almost that come, and when they hit you, they explode. They become like grenades in a sense. What happens is at one point during the fight, Eddie and Jake grab a couple of these things that they call sneeches. And it turns out these are similar to the snitches that you see in the Harry Potter series. And it actually completely name drops Harry Potter in the book, which I was very confused on at first. So I looked up when this book in particular, Wolves of the Calla, was published. It was published in 2003 when Harry Potter was already a well-established series. So, and they actually do talk about this in the epilogue, where they talk about how it is entirely possible that in Midworld, especially on Thunderclap, they have weapons from the future, because Jake doesn't recognize it, Eddie doesn't recognize it, because Eddie is technically the youngest out of all of these people, and he was only around in 1983, so he didn't see anything having to do with Harry Potter at all. It's a very funny way to look at this story, because this just is one of the many aspects that showcase how vast this world is and how it spills over into everything. A second thing in the same vein that comes up is the fact that in the epilogue, there's this bookcase that you see that Calvin Tower had Eddie bring over that kept some of his most prized possessions just in case things were to go south and something happened to the bookstore. And they bring it over and keep it in the cave. Well, one of the books that's on there has a picture on the cover that looks to Callahan like the church that he had back in Calla Sturgis. And it's similar to another church that he found in a book that also looked like this Calla Sturgis one. It turns out this book that is on this shelf is none other than Salem's Lot by Stephen King. And they are like, who is this Stephen King person? We don't know who that is. And they start to read the book, and Callahan realizes that his story, the story he had told about meeting Barlow and all the things that actually happened in the book Salem's Lot, he's like, what is this? Who put down my story? Who actually put my thoughts into this? I never told some of these things to anybody, let alone someone that would write it in a book. So he starts having this whole like conniption where he's like, I'm not a piece of fiction. I'm a real person. What is going on here? Who wrote this? What is going on? And it's just a really funny thing to me, because not only do we have like a real tie to Salem's Lot here, obviously not just with Father Callahan, but the book of Salem's Lot even comes up in this book. But again, it showcases the vastness of this world, where This book that's here could have easily have come from any other world where Callahan doesn't really exist, like our current world. Just one little itty bitty detail like that can really change the course of the entire story and change the way that the world looks in the story. And it's just so fascinating to see these little things come up like that. And I kid you not, when I sat and saw that that had happened while reading it, I was just laughing so hard because I was like, that's just genius. Stephen King calls himself out in his own book, and it's just there is no other person I can think of that does that other than Stephen King. Because he's a master at creating this multiversal space-time continuum, wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey world, and it's hilarious to me how he even just creates his own jokes in his own world about characters and brings in his own books. To wrap all this up, basically, because this video has been long enough as it is with all the check-ins and everything, Wolves of the Calla overall was really interesting, and like I said earlier, you know, just the dragging of learning about Father Callahan. I'm sure there was a whole point to learning everything there was to know about Father Callahan, but I feel like it really drug the story out so much to the point where I just kind of was like, are we ever going to get to the actual like point of the story? Are we going to see the action of fighting the wolves? And yes, we did, but not until basically the very end, which is kind of similar to what happened in Wizard and Glass, I'm not going to lie, but I felt like in Wizard and Glass, it was more enjoyable to read the entirety of the story of Roland and Susan, whereas here, like, it's still, you know, Roland, Eddie, Susannah, and Jake, but I felt that the learning of the story of Father Callahan was just way too much, and I would have preferred to actually just see the progression more so of learning of how to go about taking care of the wolves. But Father Callahan seems to be a character we will see at the very least in Song of Susannah, so maybe it's entirely possible he's going to play a bigger role, and we had to learn a lot of his information in order to see that he's going to play a bigger role. So I'm not like too jazzed about it, but I'm not super upset about it either. It's just kind of, in the moment reading it, I was very put off by all of that information. So I don't know, I feel like this for a lot of people was their least favorite when it came to the series. Maybe I'm wrong and this was a very well loved part of the series. I'm not 100% sure, but if you guys have read Wolves of the Calla yourself and have some thoughts on it you would like to share with me, things that I might have missed, something that you would like to kind of maybe ask questions about, feel free to ask in the comments below or talk to me in the comments below about it, because I am loving the crap out of reading this series, and I'm kind of sad that there's only 2 more books because I'm a little scared of what's going to happen, specifically now to Susannah, based on how this ending ended up. Like, Mia has completely taken over her. I don't know what's going to happen. We don't know where she is. I'm a little scared for my poor Susannah because I love her so much and I want her to be safe, but she also has a demon child in her, so I don't know how safe she really can be. But if you guys did enjoy this video, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you haven't already, I would like to see more content like this. Go ahead and hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye, guys!